Hi, my name's RuthAnn. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my first video, and you can probably tell I'm a little bit nervous. I'm also extremely lucky. I get to interview Wendy Behary. Wendy is the former president of the International Society for Schema Therapy. She developed schema therapy for narcissism, and she wrote the book on schema therapy for narcissism, Disarming the Narcissist, which is now in its third edition. Wendy has been working clinically with issues of narcissism for over 25 years and trains and supervises therapists across the world. She's a leader in the field, and I'm privileged to count her as a colleague, a friend, and a mentor. So without further ado, meet Wendy. So, one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about and get your view on is what narcissism is. Because I imagine when you started, Wendy, nobody knew what narcissism was, except maybe a few specialists and experts in the field.
Yeah.
And now it feels like everyone's ex-partner is a narcissist. Kind of used as an insult,
And you know that well because you and I have talked about this quite a bit, and you've done some incredibly beautiful work with individuals who are dealing with issues of narcissism, whether they themselves are carrying the traits or they are the offended parties who have grown up with someone with this personality disorder or personality type, or they're living with them, or they have been in relationship with them. And I'm delighted that you are there in the UK, able to accept some referrals because it has become such a large issue over the years. The need for people who are competent and skillful and can really see this keenly and know how to use an effective approach is critically important. So I'm grateful for you being there and able to accept these types of clients into your practice and consultations. Narcissism, you're right. I mean, when I wrote the first edition of Disarming the Narcissist, it was 2007. And there was a little handful of clinical books, for the popular audience and for therapists. I mean, there were the older versions of this and the terminology, which was really limited to our industry. But to the lay public, to the general audience, this word was really misunderstood. It still is, unfortunately, but it was really misunderstood. And so this little handful of books that was available for both clinicians as well as the general public was small. By the time I wrote the second edition, 2015, I think, there were probably 300 books. And now in 2021, when my third edition came out, thousands of books on this topic. That doesn't mean that, it's not a sign of just consciousness raising. I think it's a sign that the term became very popularized based on political leaders. I won't name names, celebrities, sports stars, etc. And suddenly this term was now in local newspapers, national newspapers, news headlines on television. It was all over the place. So it landed on the kitchen table and people were talking about narcissism. And now, as you said, everyone's partner, friend, boss is a narcissist. And that's just not true. Number one, as you and I know, it's very important to understand what narcissism is and what it isn't. And I like to say that, at the core of narcissism, you have someone who is highly self-absorbed, has a strong attitude or sense of entitlement to do as they please, to make the rules, to break the rules, can be controlling and domineering, arrogant and self-righteous, attention-seeking, approval-seeking, charming, looking for status, dismissive, detached, aloof. There's a lot of traits that go into this personality type, and at the severe end of the spectrum, where they all bundle together, you may have what we call narcissistic personality disorder. Apologies for the background noise. There's some construction outside my door. You have narcissistic personality disorder, but I think best for everyone to think of narcissism itself as happening along a spectrum, meaning levels of intensity and severity and numbers of traits that one may possess, and types that are more aggressive and grandiose and that overt form, and then that covert form that can appear to be a little bit more inhibited, but shows up as the victim martyr type, the poor me. Still looking for attention and extraordinariness, but what I like to call the super sufferer when we meet them in the clinical room.
Yeah. I guess one of the things I am really struck by is when someone says this person's a narcissist, it's very often such an insult. And it's in some ways can be so dehumanizing. Yes. And one of the things I love about your work is the ability to bring a sense of compassion to what can be some very difficult traits and difficult behaviors and difficult interpersonal styles, whilst at the same time not letting people off the hook for the ways in which they behave and how they might affect other people.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm wondering, how would you like to bring that to the popular discourse around narcissism, how we talk about it? Because it's very interesting to me. I also meet people who are terrified of being labeled a narcissist.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a pejorative label. Yeah. You're right. There's nothing about this that is friendly and welcoming. To call someone a narcissist or to receive that label. And I think that, my work and your work too is informed by schema therapy, which is a needs meeting model, if you will. And narcissists tend to need limits and accountability and the capacity to begin to become more empathic and aware, responsible for the behaviors that impact others in ways that can be very hurtful, even abusive. I see the narcissistic individual as someone who is deeply wounded and impaired. That's not an excuse. It's just that when you really understand the origins of narcissism and you see how they've evolved to become the way they are, it makes sense. We call that empathy. Making sense out of something is empathy. So my compassion would be reserved for the little child in the beginning of the story who was, came into the world as an innocent and was taught in one way or another through unmet needs and through maybe modeling that this is the way the world works. And maybe through their temperament too, they developed this style. So I can feel a compassion for the child who suffered once upon a time. I can feel an empathy, which is different than compassion, meaning I can make sense out of and understand how one puts on these masks, how one shows up this way in the world. But that doesn't mean we excuse it. It just means now it makes sense. And it's helping that individual to make sense out of it themselves. When they can see it, then there's the capacity to be able to say, I get it, but it's not okay. And here's what we need to do. Otherwise, your relationships are going to fall apart. Or there's something at stake. We hope as therapists that the best that we can find is that there's some consequence that they don't want to face, because that becomes our leverage. That becomes our opportunity to engage them in a change process.
I wonder if it might be worth us, because my guess, I know that some of my friends, some people who follow me on social media are looking forward to this, and they don't know what the schema therapy model is and how you and I would make sense of narcissism. So it might be worth saying a bit more about what are the early experiences that we would see as the origins of narcissism, and then what we mean by the modes.
Yeah, you're right. So kind of in a nutshell, if you will, we'll use someone who has traits of narcissism to give an example of how this looks. So once upon a time, there's a little child who comes into the world with a certain temperament, let's say, maybe highly sensitive to rejection, criticism, sensitive to the emotional vibrations around them. Some children have that sensitivity, maybe even a bit more impulsive than the average little one. So they come with temperament, and then they meet an environment, and they have all the needs that every child has, sort of baked in. But what they get from that environment, be it their primary caregivers, their parents, or maybe other caregivers, teachers, coaches, extended family members, older siblings. What they get instead is a message through the modeling of the individuals and through the treatment of the child that the most important thing that gives them identity, worth, and value is their performance. So what they miss in terms of those critical emotional needs is that thing we call unconditional love, attunement and empathy. Instead, what they get, they may get very spoiled. They may get a lot of goodies for showing up well, for making their parents look good, or whoever it is, for performing, for being extraordinary. But extraordinary performance is expected and usually imposed upon them at a very early age. And again, either directly or through modeling in extreme forms. And so you have a child who is kind of always on the run, competing, looking for attention, approval, recognition, showing up perhaps for a parent who's living vicariously through this child, acting as a surrogate for a parent who is lonely and needs the child to be their parentified caregiver. So this little one has to forfeit being a kid, being a little one, being a child, just being loved for their precious little self. They have to forfeit oftentimes this kind of joyful playfulness and spontaneity. They have to forfeit sometimes their natural inclinations and identity because there are an imposed set of expectations placed out there for them. And so you can see how as time goes on, the idea is if I do my job well and I really shine bright, then I should be able to do whatever I want. I should have what I want, do what I want. I'm not going to count on people to see me and know me and need me, says the schema, which is an emotional belief system, right? I'm not going to count on those people. I'll be super autonomous. I won't need anybody. I'll be the boss. I'll be in charge, which is why so many of them end up in leadership roles. And, I'm not going to show the shame and the insecurity and the inadequacy that I feel at the core of myself, which many of them carry. They carry that because their little self, who would have been frightened and sad and needy, as every child is, had to be shut down, had to be made to feel weak or ashamed when they showed those natural emotions. And so they camouflage that behind a mask of superiority and control and dominance and look at me, and sometimes charm and showing off, or, as I said, being the super victims or super sufferers. These are the modes, the ways in which they show up. So the schemas would represent the strong emotional belief system that gets logged in the library, the personal library, reference center, blueprint, whatever you want to call it, for how the world works. And the modes are the ways they show up in order to survive. And that just grows up with them over time, because at one point it's indispensable to their survival when they're very little and powerless. But as they grow, they don't necessarily relinquish it. They just continue to promote these modes. And so where they suffer most of the time is in their interpersonal relationships, particularly their intimate relationships, because they don't know how to be and connect and engage. They know how to do and perform and show and prove.
And they do it well.
And they do it well.
Very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always very surprising, I think, to people when you tell them actually underneath all of the bravado and the showing off and the ultra high performance and the condescension is very often someone who never feels like they're good enough. I'll never be good enough. I'll never be loved or accepted as I am. I have to be extra special, extra amazing. And very often that's not the feeling underneath.
And they don't know it. They don't even know that that's what lies in the underbelly of their experience, because we both know that when you confront them on this early on in treatment, they totally deny it, right? It's really hard at first for them to embrace this idea that there's a very insecure little person, living in the heart and soul of their early experience.
Which then brings me to the very interesting question, because many, many therapists will say narcissism is not treatable.
It's true. Many of them will say that. And I think part of the reason is because narcissistic individuals are overwhelming and intimidating. And most therapists feel, as most humans feel, stirred up, uncomfortable, triggered, activated, when they're in the presence of someone with this personality. It's uncomfortable, and so, and if you haven't really developed an expertise in this area so that you can kind of see it and sniff it out and sort of drop into your sturdy skin and be able to confront this in a very real way, drop your jargon, dispense with your whole, therapeutic presentation and be a real person in the room who has the expertise to understand what you're up against. It takes a lot, it takes a very, very sturdy spine. We have to maintain our most healthiest adult self in the room, or it's not going to work. And even that's not enough, because you have to have an effective treatment approach, and you have to have leverage. So if you have no leverage, meaning they show up because someone said, get help or get out, but they've now gone home and completely intimidated their partner into taking that back by threatening them, now you've lost all the leverage. Chances are you won't be able to sustain them in treatment. So it takes a lot, but it's not impossible.
What do you think? Because you obviously, you've been doing this for 30 years. I'm sure many people have asked you if you're a masochist.
Yes. What's wrong with you? Why would you want to do this?
What do you like about this work?
I think it's going to sound a little trite when I say this. I love the challenge of it, but it's more than the challenge of it. I think there's something incredibly rewarding in our work, period, but especially when we are liberating someone from these deep trenches. I feel like I'm liberating a little boy or girl, mostly I work with men, but I feel like I'm liberating a little boy who got pushed back, got pushed down, was made to feel shamed, alone, and weak for just being a child, and had unrealistic, unrelenting demands placed upon them. And so to be able to kind of emancipate them from that place, to help them to be able to come to a place where they can actually be vulnerable, where they can learn how to engage, where they can feel first, some empathy for themselves and then empathy for others, because yes, that is possible, but it's hard. There's something, just incredibly rewarding about being able to do that for someone in the same ways that other therapists who might be listening to this will identify, in helping other types of clients who are challenged with very difficult issues. So for me, I was triggered. I was like a lot of therapists who was triggered and curious and whoa, and like, look at me, what happened? The first time I think I was faced with someone with pretty severe narcissistic traits, and I just fell into this like little 5-year-old reaction to it. But I became a bit fascinated by it too, and so happened to be at the time working in the think tank or the bubble with Jeffrey Young and colleagues while we were developing this schema mode model approach for personality disorders. And I brought my own experience into that, and that sort of started the whole clock on my, I traveled that little pathway of developing the approach alongside Jeff for dealing with this population, and in so doing learned a lot about what it takes for us as therapists, how important it is to protect our own vulnerability so that we can sit in the chair in our adult skin to be able to provide treatment that will be meaningful.
Yeah. And I'm with you. It's very challenging.
Yeah.
It's also, I kind of like that challenge too, but it's also rewarding when you actually see the glimpses of the vulnerability and someone allows you to do it. It's really rewarding. And for those people I've worked with who would identify themselves as narcissists, they go, well, it does actually fit me. Yes. And when they realize that by that you don't mean you're the bad guy,
right?
or you're so irredeemable, because I think that's the other damage. Some of the language we use around, if you're a narcissist, you're irredeemably bad.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
no.
Well, that goes back to the idea of the myths, about it, because it's out there, it's all over the internet, and so often people are using the term narcissism to describe someone who actually falls into a different category, what we think of as antisocial behaviors or psychopathy or sociopathy. And while they carry narcissism, within their profile, not all narcissists are on that, at that end of the spectrum. And so it just gets so misunderstood. In addition to things like they are demons, they are devils, run for your life, they can't be helped, they are, totally broken people, they are Satan incarnate. This makes me a little bit crazy when I read this, because these are impaired people who do some bad things, but they're not bad and evil. They're impaired, and they can be helped if they choose to be helped, and they're willing to do the hard work, because it is hard work and it's a deep dig, to make those changes. They have to be willing to do it.
It is, and it's really about that willingness.
Yes.
And my experience is, unless they want, they don't want.
Yeah. And they won't at first, so we sort of have to prepare for that. Like the motivational driver at first might be just the consequence that they don't want to face. They don't want to lose their driver's license. They don't want to lose their job. They don't want to lose their partner. They've been threatened with these consequences. And so they come unwillingly, oh yippee, to your treatment room. And, our work is to try and get that leverage to switch, where the connection with you and me becomes the leverage, that it becomes important enough for them. This idea of being able to see inside, this unique privilege that we have to encourage and witness their courage as they begin to drop their guard, to let the wall down, and to really celebrate that, so that they have leverage with you. And you have the right then to be able to enforce limits and hold them accountable and help them to see the consequences of their actions. It's a process, right? It's a process, but it is a unique privilege to be able to witness that.
Another question I had for you, which I think is really interesting, is actually, it's from another writer expert in the field. It's Craig Malkin's idea of the healthy narcissist.
Yeah.
Because, and it's the idea that there's a healthy aspects to narcissism, in the sense of the underlying temperament, perhaps, not the presentations that you and I might be talking about, but the underlying temperament of being quite bold, of enjoying some excitement, of being willing to do things that are a bit new. How do we make any progress? How do we get new ideas? How do we create things new? Someone's got to be bold enough, brave enough, and ambitious enough to do it. And what I often say to the people I work with who are on that kind of narcissistic spectrum, because the thing they ask, I'm going to lose my drive. You're going to tell me, okay, you can just go around and be fluffy and nice to everyone. I'm not up for that.
Right.
If my company, I need to achieve. And I'll often say to them, I want you to achieve. I actually don't want you to drop out of your company. I don't want you to give up your career. I want you to achieve. But what I really want is for you to know you're okay, regardless of whether you achieve. But when you achieve, you get to bring everyone else with you. You raise everyone else up too. And guess what? Instead of resenting you for it, because you're the big show off, they're really happy for you.
It's lovely. Yeah, that's lovely. And so right on, so spot on, RuthAnn. I mean, Craig Malkin's work, his book, Rethinking Narcissism, which is really a good read. And he's a brilliant guy. I like Craig, and I respect his work so much. And I do think that, there are healthy narcissists. It sounds like a weird oxymoron or something, but it is those who sometimes will step on toes, and they may have to push people aside a little bit, but their mission is for the greater good. There usually is a greater good attached to it in many cases. So they do tend to be quite bold and quite, focused and, eye on the target, ambitious, but they also can be a lot of fun, as well. They can have a lot of high-spirited energy.
Boston,
Yeah.
really early on in my career, and he always used to make me laugh because he always used to say, if you want to go far, ask forgiveness, not permission.
Yeah, that's good. I like it. I like it.
As someone who was incredibly driven,
Mm-hmm.
and if you needed a psychologist, he would be the one you want.
Yeah.
Because he was incredibly committed to patients. He gave the best possible care.
Yes.
It really was phenomenal. He really drove management crazy, but you couldn't fault him.
That's great.
And also as a supervisee, I couldn't fault him. He gave a lot of time. He was very generous. He really did a lot to educate, teach. So
I love what you said too. If we can just go back to what you said about the losing my, that what I hear is I don't want to lose my edge. And so by allowing my vulnerability to come through, or sharing emotions, or putting things in emotional language, I lose my edge. And so there's this terrifying, perception, I guess, that, by allowing the emotional side of one's personality to begin to be, to wake up and to be welcomed into the world, one becomes mediocre. One becomes less proficient. And I always tell the story about the surgeon I worked with, where I said, I'd love for you to be my surgeon. Your precision, your attention to detail, your extraordinariness, your ambition, your competence, your kind of award-winning skill. I'd like to be on your table if, God forbid, I need surgery, but I don't want to go home with you. Because, the other side of it is the emotional piece, and they don't know how to turn that off at the door and go into that intimate space. That's just so foreign. They can be charming, yes, but intimacy is different than charm. And as you put it so nicely, RuthAnn, there's just this sense that they don't know that they are fine. And when I say to a client, if only you knew that you were fine. I know I'm fine. I think I'm better than fine. I'm pretty terrific. I mean, look at, they give you the list of all the reasons why. And I say, those are wonderful achievements. That's not what makes you a lovable human. It's what makes you impressive as someone who is accomplished and a good performer. But I'm talking about just being a lovable human. You don't know that you're okay, because if you did, then you wouldn't have to work so hard to try to prove yourself. And that usually gets their attention, gets them to think about that other part of who we are, the being and the doing.
Yeah. All that said, I know the other part of your work and my work is very often working with people who have been very negatively affected by some of these behaviors.
Yeah.
And it's the children, partners, siblings, employees, supervisees of people who show these kind of characteristics.
Yes.
And that can be heartbreaking, because you can sometimes meet someone who really has no idea who they are.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of bringing narcissism, the term and the conceptual understanding of it, into the public view, because what it has the capacity to do for those people who have been affected is it gives them a chance to really emancipate themselves, right? They can free themselves from all of the self-doubt and self-blame they have carried based on the way they've been treated. Because narcissists can be notorious for that thing we call gaslighting, trying to twist your reality, distort your way of looking at yourself and the world, and what's right, what's wrong, what's okay, what's good. And so partners, especially partners who have been living with this, begin to doubt their own opinions and feelings and inclinations, and feel invalidated over and over and over again. And understanding this, the complexity of narcissism, can be very freeing and can allow them a chance to re-examine their lives and look at the links, because we know so often these people who have been affected by narcissists, this may not be the first time they bumped into that idea that I'm not good enough, or, you know, I'm going to be rejected, or something terrible is going to happen. It may also be linked with their early life experiences, which makes it very hard to, you know, disengage and to care for themselves and to be advocates for themselves. I call it the, you know, the people who go voiceless and who get silenced by narcissism, and helping someone like this to reclaim their voice, and not in an angry way, but in an advocacy way, you know, to be able to have a means for standing up for themselves and changing the dance, and sometimes having to plan their departure because it's untenable. You know, the trust may have been violated in such a way that there's no turning back. But that also is such an important part of I think what we do.
It's incredibly rewarding work, actually, when you see someone actually free themselves from that relationship.
Yeah.
And also begin to, I like the concept as well, that I think is beginning to become into the kind of popular sphere, which is the concept of echoism.
Yes.
You know, so yes. Narcissus was the person in love with himself, gazing at his reflection in the pool, and Echo fell in love with him. She'd been cursed, and all she could do was echo what the other person said.
Yes. And
I think that's really true for what happens to so many people in those kind of relationships.
Yeah.
On whatever sphere, whether that's a romantic relationship, whether that's with a parent or with a boss, it really leads people to lose their voice and lose their sense of themselves. And I often see my goal in treatment is to help people find their authentic self.
Yes, and so many of them, I mean, the term echoism, again, was popularized, not founded, but popularized by Craig Malkin also. And these folks, in addition to everything you just pointed out, which is so clearly true, they carry this enormous fear of showing up narcissistic. So they're kind of apologizing mid-sentence for what they say. Oh, you know, I hope I'm not taking up too much time, and oh, I hope I didn't say too much. Oh, I don't mean to be bragging. They're always apologizing, or they're holding back. Such fear of becoming or showing up in a narcissistic way that you see like the opposite of entitlement. I often tease them and say, you need a little narcissism in your personality, just a little bit, you know, like a little more entitlement, because they have none. Yeah. And they've been maybe born and bred on that idea with a huge amount of self-sacrifice, and then they find themselves in a relationship with a narcissist who has reinforced the idea that, you know, your opinions don't matter and you're here to echo my words and, you know, hold the spotlight on me.
Yeah. Or the other way I found they show up sometimes is really angry.
Yes.
And stuck in the rage and the anger and the just the fury, which in a way I always think it's kind of healthy, because in a way, at least, you know, at least you're beginning to realize that you're not responsible for all of this. It's not all on you, which like they're kind of more like, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry for showing up, I'm sorry for taking up your time. But that real anger, and the thing I often say to them is like, I'm going to send you a video, and I send them links to you on podcasts. I don't have to do this yet. I want to give you a vision of the future, because one of the things I found so helpful in your work is the kind of concept of empathic confrontation, and also the concept of really speaking from your healthy, sturdy, best adult self.
And that's you know, you just talked about my baby. This is just so, you know, it's the critical golden nugget for me, is the notion of empathy combined with confrontation. Because I think I would thank all the narcissistic clients I've worked with for helping me to see this very clearly, like how important it is, this particular skill, intervention, strategy, whatever you want to call it. We can also share it, as you just pointed out, RuthAnn, with our clients who are struggling, between that anger, resentment, and that, oh, I don't know, I don't have the right, maybe I shouldn't, I don't know, what am I thinking? And so they struggle between this kind of self-sacrificing guilt and doubt, and then resentment and anger, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting. Anger can feel very powerful in our bodies, because literally our bodies change when we're angry in a way that heats us up and gets the heart rate pumping, and our fists might clench and our jaws might tighten. And there's this sort of false sense of power when we're angry. It's anger, and the anger is understandable, but it's exhausting. And it's exhausting on the body when it has to be present in order for you to feel entitled to your rights. Shouldn't have to be angry to feel entitled to your rights, even though the anger is understandable. Plus, the message gets lost in the delivery, right? So an angry message doesn't necessarily reflect all the important experiences that you're holding inside, that you have a right to share. Well, the narcissist won't be able to hear it, and they won't listen, and they're just going to shut me down, and they may. They may. But when you can combine empathy with confrontation, you stand a better chance, even if they're rolling their eyes and scoffing in the corner, you stand a better chance of being heard. But even better than that, you hear yourself. You hear yourself telling the truth. You hear yourself being an advocate for yourself. You hear yourself absolutely poised in this controlled, but human, so it can be animated, but in a controlled, conscious, real way. It's very real. So I say, look, I know that this is the way it usually goes for us. We end up going down this dark tunnel together, and then we end up escalating. And I can feel the anger escalating in me. You probably can too. And I know you're tired and you've got a lot on your plate right now. So it's probably not even a good idea that we carry on right with this conversation. But I also know that this needs to change, because our capacity to grow all together and share life together and have a future that light is dimming for me. It's not a threat. It actually makes me very sad, but it's just a truth that I want to say out loud. Right? Or I know you have to get a word in right now because you're used to doing that. You do that with your workmates and your subordinates, and you're the boss, and so you get to have your way, and your dad taught you that. I get it. It's not your fault. But this is our relationship. This is an intimate space, and it needs to be safe for me too. And I don't feel safe right now in this space. And I don't want to go down that dark path with you right now. So I'm going to take a break. I'm not going to have this conversation right now. These are hard things to say when you're heated and you're upset and you're scared and you're fed up, but they are so important, because you get to hear yourself, as an advocate for you, speaking your voice, your truth, your words, without the fury and the exhaustion of the anger that, kind of derails all of that meaning.
People as well about that is it's hearing yourself, and you're turning off the gaslights.
Yeah.
Saying, this is my reality, this is my experience.
Yes.
You can see it differently, but this is how I see it. And I also say, what the reaction is, whatever it is going to be useful information to you. Yes. Because if you're in a relationship and you're questioning, should I stay, should I go, what's the mileage in this, the reaction will tell you a lot.
Yes.
The reaction to you getting really angry and flaring up is not going to tell you what you need to know.
No. And in fact, if anything, it's just, in some ways, it guarantees for the narcissist that things are status quo.
Oh, yeah.
They know that dance, right? It's like it's the competition, and they will get the last word, or they will slam the door, or they will storm off, or they will roll their eyes, or they'll criticize you. But for them, it becomes like white noise. It becomes just sounds that are familiar. Once you begin to depart from that way of communicating with them, you're now taking a stand for you, and you're using a very different voice, and you're speaking of a very different intention. You're not threatening. You're just speaking of an intention, because not everyone's prepared to say, I've had it, I'm done, right? But I sort of see things dimming, or I see an inevitable ending, and it makes me sad. Right? That might be a truth for so many. I mean, for so many of the, I have this online community called Loving, Leaving, and Living with the Narcissist in Your Life, and most of the members in this online community, many of them are in that position. They're not quite there yet for a number of different reasons, but they do see an inevitable, ending to this, which is sad and scary and upsetting. And being able to put that out there might be the experiment that's needed to see, is there any leverage? Will the narcissist want to do anything about this before it's too late? That might be the test.
I wanted to ask you as well, what if the narcissist is your boss?
It's tough, right? Because, it's your boss, and most people can't just up and leave their jobs and change jobs. So there's this strategy that I find myself coaching people towards using quite a bit, which has a bit of a nauseating side effect, because it means having to, in some ways, fuel or feed the narcissistic need, right? What they call narcissistic supply. It means you're supplying some of that need for them to feel larger than life and very important and special. But if it gets them to do the right thing by you, if it gets them to pay attention, if it gets them to maybe rethink an action, if you can tolerate it, it might be worth it. So an example might be if you're working with a narcissistic boss, because they can be different. Some of them will just be highly demanding and unrealistic. Some will be more controlling and pushy. Some will be humiliating towards their employees, just calling them out in really terribly embarrassing ways in front of others, denying you, reasonable requests that you've made, denying those requests. I think whenever you have the opportunity to find a truth, find something that you admire, even if it's just their intelligence or it's their success, or it's something about the work that they're doing that you have learned from them in spite of the narcissism. Whatever you can siphon out of that to make it your truth and to present it to them, it will be helpful. So, for example, I once said to a narcissistic boss, and I think I shared this with you, RuthAnn, when my daughter was very little and I really wanted to attend, I think it was recital or something that she was, some performance. And I learned earlier on that by just asking, I would get the eye roll and, I can see where your priorities are. I can see what's important to you. And I got, the devaluing response. But when I entered the room on this day and said, because I meant it, I really did admire this individual. She was really kind of a force of nature, even though she was really prickly and difficult to deal with in terms of her arrogance and her self-righteousness. And I said, I don't know how you do it, raising a couple of children and running this company, and you've got so much on your plate and you've done so much and you've come so far, and I really admire you for that. It might sound like, so you try to also state your intentions clearly. It might sound like I'm, just giving you a whole bunch of compliments, but I mean that from my heart, that I really do admire it. In fact, I need your support and advice, because I have one kid and I'm struggling with this work-life thing and how to make it work. And she's looking at me like, what? I said, I don't know, my daughter has a little thing tonight at school, but I have hours tonight, on the books. I don't have any clients booked, but I'm supposed to be here until 8 o'clock. And she said, you go to that recital. That's what you do. That's your priority. Oh, really? Okay. Well, all right. Well, thank you. All right. It's a little gag-worthy and a bit nauseating, except that I did mean what I said. I wasn't just, kissing up to her, or I really did mean it. Was it manipulative? Absolutely. But it's manipulation that is designed to get the narcissist just to do the right thing. If I were being irresponsible, if I were canceling clients, if I were doing something that was disreputable, then shame on me. But I had really cared for everything that needed to be cared for to be responsible in order to attend this event. And it was just about getting past her narcissism, getting past her authority, and getting her to do the right thing. And so this can be translated in many ways when you're dealing with narcissistic bosses, right? Yeah. Even things like being able to say to a boss, I know this meeting is really important to you and there's so many decisions to be made, but I would so appreciate it because I learn so much better when you speak with me directly about the places where you might feel my strengths and challenges lie than when you do it in front of the group. It just becomes very rattling, as I'm sure you understand. You know, you probably already know that, so I may just be, preaching to the choir here, but it would just be really helpful for me, if you could just pull me aside on this. So you always give them the benefit of the doubt that they haven't earned and probably don't deserve in some cases, but you make that assumption and it allows them to then pick the right answer. You probably already thought of this. So, I may be just speaking your thoughts, but I was thinking that, right? And then you give them the suggestion that might help them to be able to provide what's needed.
And of telling them what you need.
Rather than telling them what to do, making the suggestion like you're now because they're always competing. You're the smart one, or, I really need to do this. Can I? Now they have the power to say no, which they'll often opt for.
Yeah, but it's still hard.
Oh, it's really hard.
Depends on the level. Depends as well on the severity of the kind of behaviors.
Oh, yeah.
And how profoundly difficult they are.
Because in many cases, your best option is to keep your distance and set limits. And that's just true of all narcissists. In many cases, if it's possible, when it's possible, set limits, meaning limits for yourself. So limit your exposure, limit the frequency, limit the amount of time you spend alone with them. Do all you can to protect your space.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the best strategy you can employ.
Yeah. And take care of yourself.
Take care of yourself. Yeah. Yeah. Always take good care of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. How do you, kind of thinking, kind of wrapping up now, but how do you see this field developing in the future? Because it's blown. It's a big thing. People are really talking about it. Where would you like to see it go?
Oh, well, where I'd like to see it go, because what I've noticed in a COVID era that we're living in, more than ever in my career, I've had individuals reach out to me who are self-diagnosing with narcissism. I think I have narcissism. I think I have problems with a narcissistic personality disorder. I think I have traits of narcissism. Where do I go? How do I get help? Are there any support groups? Are there any therapy groups? What do I read? Well, guess what? There's nothing for them to read. There is nothing written for the narcissistic individual. And although I was tempted to write that book at one time, my publisher thought, no, they're not going to buy it. They're not going to read it. I think maybe we're moving closer now that time has allowed the media to really put the terms out there, people to kind of become more awakened to this reality. I'd love to see more options available for the narcissist. I think there's a lot available for partners and family members just through good therapy and support groups and books, but I don't think there's nearly enough available for the individual. So we need more therapists trained to feel comfortable and competent working with them. We need more support groups and communities and therapy resources for the narcissistic individual.
Yeah. That will be very interesting to see.
Yeah.
Comes about, because you're right, there's nothing.
There's nothing.
And I often think it's a real shame, because most of the people I work with who would identify as having those kind of challenges, they're so filled with shame.
Yes. Yes.
That actually, if they had something they could read or do or watch that didn't require them to be face to face with someone, to actually begin that process of education.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, at the risk of sounding narcissistic when I say this, my book is probably a gentle introduction for the narcissists themselves, because instead of the more notorious just blaming and shaming, it really does go through the explanations. And so when I've had narcissistic individuals read my book, they will come away with, they feel a little sting, but they can come away with a better appreciation for the evolution of these traits and survival modes.
Yeah.
But we need more. We need a lot more.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. Thank you so much.
Oh, RuthAnn, it's my pleasure. Thanks for this wonderful interview and dialogue with you. It's been a delight.
Yeah. Anything else that you'd like to say, or you think we should talk about?
I think you covered it quite beautifully. I think the only thing I would emphasize is that last part about caring for ourselves. Take good care of yourselves as therapists, as individuals who are dealing with those who have narcissistic personalities. It does require a certain amount of, really going inside yourself and soothing your inner system and caring for your most vulnerable part of your humanness, and straightening your back and lifting your chin and pushing your shoulders back a little, not in like this mighty way, but just in this, as a reminder, as a cue that, I am an adult and I can do this. I can stand up for myself. I can have a voice. I don't have to rise into anger in order to be real, in order to be validated. It doesn't matter what the narcissist does over there. It's a bonus when they actually respond well. But what matters is that you're able to follow through, and you can hear the echo of your voice saying the things that, represent your truest self.
Yeah. So much. And there's a beautiful, I got it from you, the image exercise you do where you really get people to visualize their more vulnerable self.
Yes.
Tuck that away somewhere safe.
Tuck that away.
Sending it to your best friend's house, or tucking that little part of you into bed with a book, and the sturdy, strong adult that goes and does the confronting, the advocacy, deals with a difficult situation, has the difficult conversation, and it's an incredibly powerful experience for a lot of people. And I've used it as well with people who maybe are not dealing with narcissists, but are dealing with challenges with assertiveness. People who are involved in activism, political activism or health activism, really helping them. Don't do it from the screaming, angry place.
Right.
Do it from that steady, grounded, calm, healthy, entitled place.
Yes, absolutely.
Don't apologize for what you have to say.
Exactly.
You don't have to try to please anyone.
Right.
Stay steady, grounded, and see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing.
Thank you, RuthAnn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for watching. I'd love to hear what you think, so please do leave a comment. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share with anyone else you think might be interested. I look forward to seeing you again soon. In the meantime, take care.